Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's great to be here with you all. Welcome to tonight's virtual workshop on climate resilience and faithful democracy. My name is Avery Davis Lamb. I am the resilience coordinator for Creation Justice Ministries. I'm a student at Duke Divinity School and the Nicholas School of the Environment. And I'm really excited for the program we have here today. It's the third in a series of climate resilience trainings, and the third of many to come. So thanks for those of you who have joined before, and a particular welcome for those of you for whom this is your first virtual climate resilience workshop with us. A couple housekeeping things before we move on. You'll notice you all were muted when you came into the Zoom room. We ask that you remain muted throughout the call. That just makes it logistically easier. We have a good group of people here today. We will have a question and answer period at the end. So throughout the presentations, if you have any questions, please enter those into the chat. They'll be collected by Annika, who is running our tech for us today. And then at the end, we'll direct those questions to the appropriate presenters. To go over our agenda for today, this workshop will go until 7 p.m. Eastern time, whatever time that is for all of you who are joining from across the country. We'll start out with an opening prayer and reflection from Reverend Conyers. And then I'll share a little bit of framing about deep democracy as resilience. We'll hear about climate migration, hospitality, and advocacy from Reverend Christina Peterson. And then finally, we'll go away from this with some resources for deep democracy in our own communities. And then finally, as I said before, we will end with some Q&A. So to start out, I will be introducing Reverend Conyers, who I've had the joy of working with. Dallas lives in Spartansburg, South Carolina. She is the Southeast Faith Leaders Network coordinator for the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, which means that she has her fingers in a lot of really, really good climate resilience, climate advocacy work happening here in the Southeast, which is one of the front lines of sea level rise and climate change in the nation. She's also the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator for the Southeast Climate and Energy Network. And she is a self-described preacher who likes to grow things. We had a great moment before starting the call today where we were sharing some of our produce that we've grown over the last couple days. So with that, I will hand it over to Dallas for our grounding and reflection. Go ahead, Dallas.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, Avery. Yeah, we were totally geeking out. Christina came in with bananas. I need to show you guys my peppers. Peppers that I showed to everybody because they're way too hot to eat. But just like us, there's a purpose and a place for everything in creation. And somebody wants those peppers that'll melt your stomach lining. Just not me. I want to thank you all for coming out. It's a beautiful thing to be working towards worship, because worship is an action. And this work is definitely to do the work of God. So thank you for coming out to do that on the Tuesday evening. Let us get comfortable. Let us direct our gazes and our thoughts inward for a moment and just take a deep breath in and let it out. And the reason why breathing is so important, I always tell people, is because breath is life. Breathe in. And as you breathe in, remember that it was through the process of breath that God spoke the world into creation. Breathe out. It was the process of breath that God breathed life into us, therefore imparting his spirit into us. Breathe in. It is the process of breath that every time we breathe in and go ahead, breathe out, we reintroduce ourselves into the power of God, into the beauty of God, into the investment that God made into us and for us. And because we are able to breathe in and out, breathe in, nice and slow and deep, enjoy this gift. Because we are able to breathe in and out over and over and over again, at our will, it mimics breathe out, the way we are able to reinvest ourselves into God's love, God's grace, God's presence each and every day. And we can do it by our choice because He has made Himself available just as air has been made available. So just breathe normally and let us remember that this is sacred work, protecting the very air that reminds us of who God is and who we are to Him. And let us pray. Father, it is an incredible thing to meet with people across the country, so enamored of you and your creation, so determined to do your work, that even when we cannot gather together and touch one another physically to agree under your sight and gaze, to be heard, but also just to come out, be willing to come out and touch through hearts and minds electronically, so that there is no missed opportunity of being with one another, to rejuvenate each other, to re-impress upon each other the importance of your work. Because what we live in and what we take for granted so often is your work. And to do otherwise is to downgrade the value of your work. Let our hearts not be hardened or our minds turn away from the fact that we are respecting you and therefore worshiping you and loving you when we tend to what you have given us to tend to. Even outside of it, whether or not we are the 10 people who are supposed to be taking care of it, the fact is, it is yours and we are only here for a moment of time. So bless us now to see very, very new in a wide open vision. Let our vision be opened up so that we can see what our day-to-day functions and capacities in our workplaces, our day-to-day interactions within our church homes and church communities, our thoughts and our plans, let them all be touched by you and reinvigorated, and let the information be a reinvestiture of all of the above, so that when we go from this meeting, it doesn't have just new ideas. It doesn't just have new plans, and it doesn't only have new anointing from you, but it has your power, your scope, your determination, your hand stamp of approval, your willingness to do the work and just work through us, and that we stop fighting against you and trying to do what we think is right, but instead we hear you fully and react to you calmly and adjust ourselves accordingly. Bless us that as we grow and as a community, that we grow with one another, that we not value ourselves one above another, that we do not honor position or placement or amount of money that is had, or even amount of education or who we know, but instead we regard one another as we should, which is as equals in your sight. That we take this value in our faith and we brand it as an inherent value in our work and relationships, and that we take this also into what we do in communities, not taking it upon ourselves to look down on our communities, but instead lift them up as fellow children of yours, able to do just as much as we are because we're all doing it through your power. Bless us to change our mindset about who we're really helping when we serve you. Let us to remember that it is a joy to serve you. It is our own pleasure to serve you. It is our own reward to do the work you call us to and be blessed by you. And that it is not in us to change people's lives, to save people, but that is simply your job. So minister unto us and teach us how to be ministers from you and not of our own selves and not of our own wisdom. Keep us so that when we have opportunities and resources, we know how to use them, and we know when to share them, and we know when to let go of things when they become too much, and trust that you have capable people around us to do the work. And if they are not there right now, open our eyes to the person who is just waiting for an opportunity to do more and to step up and to be present and to be activated. So give us hearts and minds and ears to see fully what you speak of us, and give us hearts to trust you even if what we're looking at doesn't seem like what we should be seeing. But bless us, God, to lead us, to direct us, and never forsake us. Keep us always in the will and in your presence, and never stop knocking on our doors. May we answer, and may we say, yea, God, here I am. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you for that, Dallas. As Dallas shared with us there, part of this work of resilience is cultivating resilience within ourselves. That's why it's so important to start with a reflection, a theological reflection, and a prayer on why we do this work. So thanks for taking us into that space, Dallas, and for reminding us that we don't seek to fix others and to fix communities, but we seek to be a part of healing for all. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to shift gears a little bit here and move into the framing of deep democracy and climate resilience. So I will share my screen here again. And we're going to return to a question that has been important throughout this journey of climate resilience, and that will continue to guide us as we try to figure out how, as communities of faith, we can cultivate resilience. And that question is this: how can our churches be hubs of climate resilience in our communities, helping our neighbors weather the physical and the spiritual storms of the climate crisis? And this question is central to our churches as we work on responding to the biggest crisis of our time. It's an extremely localized question for a global problem, because if climate change is anything, it's a problem that manifests itself in our local communities. It's a question that our communities will have to ask over and over again as our climate continues to change. And it's a question that in this season is particularly important to our work of democracy. That as the climate crisis accelerates, it's clear, as we can see all around us on the East Coast, on the West Coast, throughout the Midwest and the Southeast, that our communities are at risk. And deep democracy offers an opportunity for healing for our communities. So with that, let's dive into what is climate resilience and what is deep democracy. Well, these terms come from Pathways to Resilience, which is a great document put together by the Kresge Foundation and by a number of partners, which defines climate resilience as climate change mitigation plus adaptation plus deep democracy. The resilience isn't just focusing on adaptation to the detriment of mitigation. It's not focused on responding to sea level rise and ignoring the fact that we have to reduce greenhouse gases. No, it's a proactive posture that combines mitigation, combines adaptation, and as we'll talk about today, combines deep democracy. So rather than bouncing back from disaster, as we often think of resilience, what we're looking at here with this definition of climate resilience is bouncing forward toward a more just and equitable society. That yes, the climate crisis is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity for us to build the kind of just and equitable society that we all deserve to live in. And the locus of that building can start with our churches. So this leads us to the question of deep democracy. What is deep democracy? It's a strange term. It's very evocative. This is how Pathways to Resilience defines deep democracy. It's fostering social cohesion, inclusion, power, and participation in the communities that are already confronting new climate realities. So deep democracy, voting may be a part of deep democracy, Congress may be a part of deep democracy, but that's not the heart of it. The heart of it is cohesion, inclusion, power, and participation. And it's those four things that are particularly located in the communities who are already confronting new climate realities. And I think many of you who are on this call are part of those communities. And it's clear that there are more of those communities now than there were even 5 or 10 years ago. So deep democracy, as I said, it doesn't only occur at the public and the political level. Yes, those levels are really important. And as we're in the middle of an election season, it's clear that what happens over the next month or so will have reverberations for our democracy and for our communities. But I think what's important for this call and for our work in churches is that the construction of networks of social cohesion, inclusion, power, and participation happens in our communities. That these are things that we build through the structures of our churches that then reverberate outward and are able to heal others. So that's the framework that we're working with today. Deep democracy as this net, this meshwork of cohesion that starts by cultivating relationships and cultivating justice in our church communities. So one particular locus where deep democracy is clear is in this question of climate migration. And this is something that Christina is gonna bring us more into, particularly with a theological framing. But what I want to share is kind of the reality of climate migration over the next century and how climate migrants will come to reshape our communities. So I'm going to share a map here, which is overwhelming to begin with, but we'll walk through it here, so don't worry. So what we're looking at here is a graphic from a PLOS One article, a peer-reviewed scientific article that came out just about 6 months ago. And what we're seeing here is in the blue are counties in the United States that are going to be or are already directly affected by sea level rise. So you can see all along the East Coast, obviously, and all along the West Coast, these are any counties that are going to be directly affected by sea level rise. And then in the deeper shades of red there are counties that will be indirectly affected from climate migrants who are displaced from these directly affected communities. So what you see here is that in the deepest red, that's where more than 9% of the population there will be affected by climate migrants moving into the county. And so what we see here is an invitation into climate hospitality. What we see here is that the climate crisis is not only going to affect these blue counties. The climate crisis, and for this, we're only looking at sea level rise too. This isn't even accounting for the way the climate crisis manifests in other ways. That just looking at sea level rise, counties throughout the Midwest, counties throughout the Southeast, all across, east of the Rockies, that's, obviously so much color. And I would imagine if there was an accounting for climate displacement from fires, the West would be equally covered with this. And so it's not, the sea level rise and the climate crisis is not an issue that is localized to the coast. It's an issue that we're all going to have to deal with in our communities inland, because we will be opening our doors to welcome these people who are displaced from climate change. And it's also an issue of deep democracy. because the climate crisis is going to result in a shifting of communities and a shifting of populations. And obviously that's going to have an effect on our public life. And it begs the question of how can we develop a future America that is just and equitable for all in the midst of climate displacement. So this is a picture that might be scary on, at first. You look at this and like a lot of the climate crisis, it can bring up feelings of worry, feelings of dread even. But I see this and I see it as a picture that doesn't have to be scary or overwhelming, but one that can be beautiful and hospitable. The question that arises here for us today is how, as people of faith, we can be agents of deep democracy in our private, communal, and political lives. Given the changing nature of the climate crisis, and given the changing nature of climate migration across our country, how can we fling open our doors and welcome people with love and with justice? With that, I'm going to introduce our next presenter, Reverend Christina Peterson, who will be able to share more on this note. Christina is a Louisiana dweller in the Mississippi Delta. She lives in Bayou Blue, Louisiana. She is a lifelong practitioner of justice, has worked for justice in many different ways throughout her life, and I've loved hearing about that with her over the last few months that we've been working together. In her current professional work, she is a facilitator with the Lowlander Center, which focuses on climate dislocation, as well as radical adaptation, both in the Mississippi Delta and outward. With that, I will hand it over to Christina to take us through the next section of our program.
Thank you, Avery, so much for the wonderful introduction. And it's just really heartwarming to see so many people from all over North America that have joined in for this discussion. For it's not just an issue that is for the coast, it's for dislocation internally throughout all of our land, as far as with droughts, with changes of rivers, changes of lakes, and so on. So it's really an issue that is pertinent to all of us. I'm going to start at the end of my presentation, and that is that we have some policy positions that we want to share. And one big policy document that will be coming out immediately after the election. So look for that. But the other pieces that I do want to share right now are that the Lowlander Center has been working to advocate for a cabinet level secretary for adaptation and resettlement, so that they would be able to have the kind of resources to address the complexity of all the various different issues that go into the understanding of holistic approach. So that's one thing that we wanted to get on the table. And then also we're pushing for a policy of climate adaptation, which is a rejuvenation of land, climate adaptation land trust, I should say, fully. Which is the rejuvenation of land that needs restoration, almost like our national forest. Set aside land that can be dedicated for use for future migration, and to heal the land before it becomes destroyed into like a dust bowl situation. Another is that we're really advocating for people in local communities, in regional partnerships, to look at policies both at the very local to also a regional approach. So, if a parish or a county or state or a connection of states like the Appalachian Planning Commission, things like that. So just not think about policy on the national level, but let's think about policy also from the local. And since this is coming from a faith tradition, and that we, if for those of you who've been following the lectionaries this past year, the whole Matthew gospel is so rich of uplifting that whole concept of an I-thou relationship with each other and the I-thou relationship with God. And that's really where we've got to start, is in that a fullness thereof, of understanding that respect, that relationship, because we are standing on sacred ground, and we're standing in sacred relationships with each other. So as we start from that place, as Avery had said, I have been involved with disaster ministries outreach for about 40 plus years, connected with Church World Service, with Presbyterian Disaster, while serving a congregation in some of those time periods. And during those times, I've experienced working with people who were refugees during the early 80s. I've worked with folks who were displaced out of the Dust Bowl, or the Rust Belt, people who were displaced out of chemical disasters, even some of the people that came from Chernobyl. So there's many different kinds of ways in which we're displaced by war, other kinds of conflict. But the climate is also one of those elements that is, like COVID, is just adding to that dimension and complicates it. So in that work, we need to find where the gaps are in policy, the gaps are within our understanding theologically, and help then think through that. So in the work, most recently in the last 15, 20 years of climate displacement, I've been working with communities in Alaska, Washington State, and our coastal communities in Louisiana. And part of what we've been talking about from a biblical standpoint is who we are, as how we identify ourselves. And there's the old pericope from the Old Testament, "A wandering Aramean was my father." It's one of the oldest statements in the Bible. And it's a way of, when people were nomadic, that they had a way to identify who they were and who they are, and so that they had that continuity. So thinking about that kind of continuity. Then the other aspect that comes out of a biblical framework from the continuity is the radical hospitality. You know, the radical hospitality of Jeremiah in the ruins of a city where everything was destroyed. Jeremiah's told to get a piece of land and build, houses and restore a vineyard. And in order to do that, you have to be regenerative. You have to think creatively. And what was that for? It was so that you could have radical hospitality when the exiles came back. So thinking and talking about that in the context of knowing that your place is disappearing below your feet or underneath your tundra, people start questioning, okay, so how do we think about this whole concept of radical hospitality, being a sojourner, and also understanding that we're grieving the loss of what we have. So Glenn Albrecht, a person from Australia, has something that he calls soul nostalgia. It's grieving the loss of something while it's being lost in immediate time, but also anticipating the loss. So it's almost like climate hospice. It's a strange kind of dichotomy, because you want to celebrate the earth and the fullness thereof, and yet you're grieving the place of where you're not going to be able to come back to because it's going to be gone. So it's not quite exile, but it's also kind of brings in that sense that we are going to be exiled. So that's why we kind of started using that idea of sojourner, the wandering Aramean, so that we could collect our identity and help that identity to move us forward into whatever it is that God's calling. So in looking at those concepts biblically, we started, as far as our work with the various communities around this country, and then also Hawaii, Marshall Islands, as far as outside of the 48 states, and then also started looking at some of the communities in Canada that were threatened, and working with folks in the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, and Kiribati, and Bangladesh, in conversations with communities to communities. Part of sharing that faith journey together was phenomenal, but also finding the gaps with the framework for policy and the gaps in the framework for theology, doing the hard work both theologically and policy-wise. So what we did is we started coming up with the best principles in order to be able to even start talking about that. So we started with the I vow, the relationship, the deep, deep democracy relationship. The next is what we adopted as the framework from the United Nations, the indigenous rights, the human rights, rights of the children, and also environmental rights. So that anything that we do is a rights-based approach, and that becomes that plumb line of how we measure going forward. The other, when we started actually working, when Ile de Jean Charles tribe invited us to work with them on a resettlement plan for their community, to bring their community back together that had been shattered and scattered by storms. They, in the conversation of values and what they wanted to see inculcated into those values, it was very much the best principles of what we could find, of best principles of practice, both for the environment, both for human dimensions, and that combination of our human and non-human brothers and sisters, because they are going to be migrating too. It's not just the humans. So we need to figure out how we can be a holistic community of healing. So with that, I would like Avery to put up a couple slides. We put together a team of folks. This was all volunteer. It was, we worked for many, many, many years. Ile de Jean Charles, you can see on the map. I don't know if I have, do I have a cursor here that you can see? So this is Ile de Jean Charles. And you can see where the coastline it has kind of been eaten away. This is the land that it used to be. And they know that they were disappearing, and as far as land mass for their tribe. So we put together a tribal idea of inculcating all these best principles theologically, ethically, morally, and the best principles of practice in order to be able to come out with, on the other end, with something that would not produce harm, but something that would produce rejuvenation and regeneration of a healthy future, a seventh generation concept. And it was lauded by many different entities, including the Obama White House. And we eventually won a award from the HUD NDRC. Unfortunately, we have not received it. And so this project is still looking for funding. So if you can go to the next slide. Whoops, did you skip one? Okay. The engagement was with all people of all ages from the tribe. As you see the little girl there, we had infants to the very elderly. I think the oldest person was 98 years old. And as they needed different types of expertise, we would find the kind of expertise to work in collaboration with the tribe, where the tribe was in leadership the entire way. And then as they started looking at applying the best principles and drawing out what that would look like for the human and environmental dimensions, we started getting people who could draw that and engage with it. It was exciting. This took us quite some time. We presented it to the the Clinton Global Initiative. We've received recognition through several other entities, including National NAS and NSF. And if you go to the next one, this was the vision that on the lower left-hand side, knowing too that when you have a sojourning community, a community that's moving together inland, and you have a community of hospitality, we knew from previous experience that there was racial pushback of not wanting to have the possibility of land value go down because you have Native Americans living by you. And so what we did is to look at how you become a good sojourner and how do you help increase the probability of hospitality. So around the perimeter of the site that was planned for is, well, this is all cypress trees. Cypress trees pump 880 gallons of water per day. And then inland, or from the cypress trees, there were, it was going to be an agroforestry so that folks could have all their own trees, fruits, nuts, and so on, which then presented itself as a sound barrier and also water absorption for all these other homes around the area. And the bayou that ran through it was dry at the time which we drew this map. And we were going to restore that in order to make healthy wetlands to clean the water. So any water that dropped in the area would be cleansed through the wetland process in order to have healthy water. And healthy water then became geothermal and also for crawfish ponds, for fishing, and then the homes being all zero carbon neutral. So it kind of a very holistic place. And then the kinds of native trees all through this area, so that migratory birds, which we have huge number of migratory birds, butterflies and everything that come through this area, all those that need and depend upon healthy environment could utilize it. So it was a human and non-human environmental integrity. And so that was the vision. We were excited about it. And as I said, it was a bit derailed. We're still looking for funding for it. But out of this application of best principles for making the sustainable zero impact type of resettlement, we came across many different issues that we have gaps at the federal policy, in the federal policy area. And in those gaps, we're now proposing ways in which to address that. We don't have any particular agency at this point that addresses climate adaptation and adaptation measures, including resettlement. And so that's why the policy. But also in the conversation that we're having now with churches, with congregations, not only in our area, but other areas, we're having these conversations both from the communities that have to move to the communities that will more than likely be receiving folks. And that is a huge conversation. And that's a conversation that you can start now within your congregations or where you worship. Part of that is there's a lot of times hesitancy, especially in the political climate now, of the stranger. But if we reframe that into the concept of radical hospitality of what Jesus calls us to do, we can be entertaining angels in our midst. And so as this goes forward, we're really excited about this kind of inland coastal conversation that will, in some ways, as we talk in the watershed areas, will rejuvenate some of the communities that have been depleted with the outmigration for some of the smaller rural communities. And they'll be able to regain new people, new skills, new ideas. And so that is now in play in that conversation. So it's hard work, but it's work that we need to do. And it's work that is challenging, but it's work that, again, we're in unprecedented times. And I think God's given us the skills. You know, it's reflected with as many people that are on this call. So let me end now so that we can do questions and answers and follow up.
Wow, thank you, Christina. What an amazing vision. What amazing work. It's exciting to see how how there can be such beauty in the midst of dislocation and the possibility that is there. I see some questions popping up about that we'll be sure to touch on in a moment in the Q&A section. Thank you so much. So before we move on to Q&A, I just want to share a few resources for everyone on deep democracy. Let me share my screen here. The first is, well, before I get to what's on the screen here, as Christina mentioned, this work of resilience advocacy is very localized. And so what I'm sharing here is on the federal level, but there's a lot of movement for resilience legislation, climate displacement legislation, all of that work happening at the state level. And that goes for, in the West, kind of legislation around the wildfires and displacement from that. And in the East and throughout the Gulf, resilience work happening at the state and the local level. So I encourage you to just do a little research on your own to figure out what is actually happening in your neck of the woods around resilience policy, because this is, there's some really good stuff happening. I know here in North Carolina, where I am, there's a resilience department, but what they need is they need faith-based advocates who know the communities and the churches who are able to make this a reality for communities. So I encourage you to do that. On the federal level, if you're interested in learning more, then I encourage you to go to climatecrisis.house.gov/report. This is a report from the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, which was established in 2018, and over the last 2 years has been working on putting together a report that looks at the climate crisis from essentially every dimension you can think of, and then provides recommendations for policies that can address those issues. So I just included 3 ones here that are related to resilience out of about 20 different topics. You can see disaster risks, environmental justice, and ocean and wetland ecosystems. But what this is a blueprint for what a federal resilience plan might look like. The other resource I want to share with you is the Faithful Resilience Guide from Creation Justice Ministries. And this is a 6-part guide to building spiritual, physical, and social climate resilience in your faith community. So if you're interested in an entry point to talking about climate resilience at your church, this is what you need to download. This can be used as a 6-part sermon series. It could be used as a 6-part Bible study guide, or it could be used just as a guide for your green team or your green ministry to dive into climate resilience. I will say this is focused on coastal communities rather than communities that are affected by other aspects of the climate crisis, but I think there's still a lot of really good information and resources that could be translated. I'll skip over these for now just to move on. And then finally, I can't let you go without sharing just a few voting resources considering the season of voting that we're in here. So I've listed faith-based other resources. This is also a moment for crowd sharing. If you know of other resources, go ahead and pop those in the chat, so we can make sure that everyone has the resources they need to both get registered and to go vote, and to feel like they're able to vote their values when they go into the voting booth. Finally, I want to take a moment and share the topic for next month's resilience webinar, which is on spiritual after November 3rd. I think there will be a real need to think about how the trauma side of resilience. So a little bit of what Dallas was getting into in the beginning of both how do we cultivate internal resilience in the face of the climate crisis, but also how do we as communities of faith offer resources to our communities that are going through traumatic experiences because of the climate crisis. How can we guide them for the new spiritual realities that we're facing as a result of climate change? So tune in. We'll be joined by Dr. Beth Norcross, who's the director of the Center for Spirituality and Nature, and we'll have a couple other yet unconfirmed guests. It'll definitely be another great webinar in this series. With that, I'm going to transition over to the Q&A section of our time. So Annika has been collecting our Q&A questions. If you have any now, please go and add them to the chat. And we'll get those, and I'll take a look here and see what we have. So I'll start with a question for Christina. And this is a question for me, some facilitator privilege here. Christina, I'm curious how the community was involved in planning that, I guess, resettlement village. I'm not sure how to refer to it. That area that you shared with us. Was there a participatory planning process in that? How did they make decisions? And then sort of what are the next steps for making that plan a reality?
Thank you for the question. The tribal council, the protocol with the particular tribe is that it's they have a chief, and the chief, we did everything through the chief, but the chief would pull together his entire tribe, and it was a participatory model. They asked us to participate with them. And it was only on the basis that we had also a working agreement of principles of relationship, so that they were leading, were controlled and staffed by the tribe, and everything from energy to concrete issues to water to design, everything. It was fabulous. We worked for about 5 years, and in 1 year we were counting up the number of meetings that we had together over shrimp boils and oyster roast and things like that. And it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 87 just in 1 year. And this is 5 years. So it was continuous. It was a participatory action process led by the tribe, for the tribe, of the tribe. So that was exciting. And like I said, babies to the elderly, and everyone participated as they could.
Great. And what are the next steps for making?
The next steps are that we're looking for funding from a foundation. Everyone's assuming, because of all the media attention, that the tribe received the money for the resettlement. They did not. Money was spent else in another way. So we're still looking for that. We are working right now with Drexel University, and they're working with the neighboring tribe of Grand Caillou Dulac to look at a possibility of morphing the design for their tribe to look at a piece of land a little bit north of them, of their tribe. But we're still looking for foundations or for congregations to be able to help support it.
Great. Okay, a few questions in here from the map I shared showing climate displacement and relocation. So I linked to the article earlier on. When I have a chance, I'll pull that link again and reshare. One of the questions is if there's a similar analysis for other countries. I'm not sure if there's an analysis in the same way that this article has, but I will share a couple really good New York Times pieces over the last month. One called The Great Climate Migration that looks at this kind of on a global scale, particularly with a focus on Latin America. There's that one. And the other one is entitled How Climate Migration Will Reshape America. And both of these are great because they weave together narrative and kind of quantitative analysis. So those will be two really good places to start as far as a global look at climate migration goes. Okay.
Avery?
Yeah.
There was a question, let me just answer that real quickly, about the time that it took as far as the work on the planning. There are a couple communities in Alaska that have been working for more than 40 years on trying to resettle. Since there is no dedicated fund or agency, it means having to bounce back and forth between various agencies or help. And one of the crucial issues that you all need to understand is that communities really don't want to move, but when they have to move and they announce that they're moving, the money that goes for infrastructure support to the community is then ceased. So like some of the communities like Shishmaref, Kivalina, Newtok, when they announced that they were going to resettle, they no longer have sewer systems or water systems. And so all the water has to be brought in by truck or other means. The federal funds won't go to something that is not a permanent structure. And since you declare that you're resettling, then you become this kind of in no person's land. You're twixt in between, and yet there's no actual body of resources in order to get you to the other place.
Christina, a question for those of us who are in congregations and churches. As we think about resettlement, how can we start preparing our physical spaces, our worship spaces, preparing our hearts, even kind of preparing the way our our polity is structured for the new realities that are coming for us. From your perspective, as someone who is seeing this on the front lines and is able to look down the road, what guidance can you offer those of us who will need to be, actors of climate hospitality? Thank
you for the question, Avery. In my own congregation, Bayou Blue Presbyterian Church, most of the folks who are members of the congregation were part of the grand derangement of the Acadians that were pushed out of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island area back in 1756 or so. And in anticipating that kind of thought of change of population, I had them start talking about their own stories, their own history. And then the stories that they know of others who have had to change, not by choice, but because of other kinds of pressure. So to actually start personalizing it within their history. To start you center yourself in that kind of story, and then start putting the biblical stories together as far as what are the other ones who've had to that associate with the kind of story that you had from your own background. Then the other part that some of the congregations that I've been working with is to start looking at what kind of assets are within your congregation, and both land, monies, policy, legal help, and to start anticipating what kinds of things people need. I noticed there was a couple Episcopalians on the line. One program the Episcopalians did back after the Rust Belt, and it was people who had to move out of the Appalachian area when steel plants were shut down. And the Appalachian communities wanted to go together, not as individuals, but together as both a cultural entity and as in a church almost entity. And so the Episcopalian Church in Gary, North Carolina, started a program called New Wineskins. And they would adopt clusters of families, people, to take them in and do a very holistic approach on how to resettle, find jobs, introduce to the community, so on, make them totally welcomed. I would think that the congregations could start thinking about what are both the gifts and the opportunities that they have that could welcome in both individuals, because there's going to be individuals moving, individual families, individuals themselves, and also clusters. And then in some cases, whole communities that want to move together. And so each one of those has a little bit different nuance, but start thinking about policies in your area that can set aside land for land trust. That's a policy that you can make with your local planning department. Think about how money is going to be spent on housing and infrastructure. Support those kinds of things. Support the kinds of things that you'll need to welcome in a new population base. And then think about the kinds of skills that come with the people and the knowledge that comes with the people, and start having those conversations now. So we have congregations in the middle of the state that are having conversations with people on the edge of the water and exchanging ideas and knowledge. And then we're doing water-based since we're a watershed area, what are the kinds of things that the people further north can anticipate with climate? And the people further south know that. So how can one aid the other in anticipating what's going to happen to themselves, but also to welcome people?
Great. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for everything, for this presentation, for your deep theological grounding, and the clear practical steps that we can take in our congregations, both now and looking to the future. As we move into a closing, I'm going to hand it back over to Dallas to send us off, again, just as we came in, to cultivate inside the healing that we're seeking in the world. So go for it, Dallas. Dallas, we're having trouble hearing you. Nope, still muted.
While she's unmuting, people are welcome to contact me if they would like.
Okay, we're getting the shrug from Dallas. Seems to be some tech problems. I'll close with a short benediction, though. I'm sure I can't do it in the way of Dallas. Maybe I'll include her benediction in the follow-up email that comes out later this week, so you all can be blessed by that. But thank you all for joining us today. As you go forth into the world, into your communities, may you seek resilience internally, may you seek healing externally, and may you be blessed in this good, important work of climate justice. Thanks everyone for being here. Have a great evening.
Thanks.